Hello everybody, this is Katie Vandermeer. Welcome to Chapter 6 Lecture on Functions. So this is a pretty short chapter, and we won't have a particular coding assignment with it, but we're going to combine Chapter 6 and 7 because they're both short in their own right. But they're important, so it's good to talk about them. Now, especially when you go on to programming, so you know what we're talking about when we use the words like functions and modules and methods. So I kind of, in the past, have used these terms interchangeably. And just going to create a little notepad here for you real quick. So we have the term functions, modules, methods that we've been using to kind of all describe these subroutines that we're creating. So we know that a module or subroutine is just a block of code that we separate from the other parts of our code. So we've been breaking down modules and subroutines into kind of input, calculate, and outputs. Methods it's a module. So it is a module, but it's what we call modules in object-oriented code. But it is what we call modules in object-oriented languages. So things like, I'll just abbreviate, well, object-oriented, so you know what that is. That's things like OO is like Java and C++ and Visual Basic.NET and C#. These are all object-oriented languages, and when we have these subroutines inside of a class, they're called methods. So they still kind of operate the same way. And this chapter is called Functions, and what functions are, they're modules, but they return a value back to where it was called. So you know how we did, like in our module, where we called our subroutine, you know, we had our sub and we called it input data or something like that. And when we were up higher in our code, we did our call where we said input data. So it jumps down to here, does that. Well, if this were a function, it would have a return statement and return a value, like answer or something, so that this goes back to where it was called, and you'd have to give it a place for it to go. So in Small Basic, you can't technically code functions, but we can use pre-written functions. We code modules, but they don't return anything. So that's the difference with modules and functions. Know the differences because it's important to kind of know when you're talking about the terms, it's important to know the difference between functions, modules, and methods. So again, functions and methods, they're both modules. This is just the generic term to describe these blocks of code. Now, if it's a method, it's an object-oriented language, and it could return something or not. And then a function is any module that returns a piece of data from where it was called, such as this. So keep that in mind or write that down as your notes. Now, Small Basic, we can use pre-written or library functions, but we can't really code our own to return things. But we're going to start using some of these pre-written or built-in modules. So let's look at the chapter briefly, and then we'll just look at a sample code for this video lecture. And as you know, when you do the quiz, you're going to read through this section as well. So it's important to, know what, oh, here's the arrow. it's important to read through the chapter so that you can answer those questions right or correctly on the quiz, and also know when we use these terms. So library functions, these are built into the programming language. Now every programming language has different set of library functions that you can use, but a lot of them are the same. So you don't see what the internal workings of the functions are, so we call them black boxes, but we can use them. And in Small Basic, we've been using library functions. So for example, this right here, anything that has a parenthesis after it, that's a function. So when I say text window.write, I'm passing this string literal to the write function, the WRITE function. It goes out there, does what it has to do, and then sends back the output to the screen. Or it returns nothing. So you can see over here what it does, returns nothing. When we look at read, this one actually does return the number that was read from the text window. So you can kind of see what's going on when you're looking at these operations menu in Small Basic, but these are this is an example of a library function. When I call text window.read, it goes out to this back part of the code, it reads the number and returns the number that is from the input of the keyboard that the person entered into this variable option. So there's a function that returns a value, whatever I entered into the keyboard. It's a black box because I can't see that code that makes read number work. It just works. So there's a lot of functions that are written in every language that we just use as programmers. So we don't reinvent the wheel, or we don't have to recode all of these things that already exist. So as a programmer, your job is to figure out what functions or library functions you need to use for your program. So Small Basic, I think there's a clock function. Or a time function. These are examples. Oh, I should know this by now. Every time I Google when I'm recording a video, my internet just slows down to nothing. Get my notes out. But I think there's like a clock function that you can use in Small Basic. Have this PDF opened. Clock.time, for example. And this is another one where we can pull the time from our system and display it to the screen. So text window dot write line, and then I want to do clock dot date. How about that? So if we look at this, we can see over here that these are the objects that are part of clock. You could call date, day, hour, minute, month, all of these things. And then when you pick a specific one, it just returns the system date. So run this program, 10/20/2015. That goes out to my computer, grabs that, and pulls it back. So we didn't write the code here. We didn't write the code that grabs the clock date. We just accessed it. So there are some library functions in Small Basic that you'll use or that you'll find. And again, like I said, with any programming language, when you are learning that language, you'll learn the library functions. A lot of them are similar. So if it's like .time in Small Basic, it's probably .time in Java. So read about library functions if you're confused on those still. This chapter talks about random functions, and if you did, I think it was the extra credit assignment that I gave, there was a random or math random function that you could have used in Small Basic. And there is an example in this PDF. I'm not sure if it's in this one, but we'll go through this here in a minute after we're done with the chapter. Where was I? Okay, so this is a random function. Most languages have random. It takes two arguments. Remember, anything in parentheses, we kind of learned this back when we first did Chapter 3 on modules. Anything in parentheses, these are called arguments, and then the arguments get placed into a parameter list. Now, we can't really do that in Small Basic, but can send arguments to functions. So here's an example. I'll send this code out. I've saved this code and I'll attach it to the lecture video. But here's an example where we call graphics window.drawRectangle. DrawRectangle is a function that's part of Small Basic, and it takes arguments, 4 arguments. So what are the 4 arguments for this? If we look at the operation, it's the x coordinate, the y coordinate, the width of the rectangle, and the height of the rectangle. So we want to draw, this for loop draws each increment of the rectangle, and then because we have it in a for loop, we are we're making the rectangle smaller and smaller and smaller as we go from 100 to 95 to 90. We're stepping 5 through that for loop, 5 increments. But you'll see that when we run the program. But what I wanted to show you here is a function called drawRectangle that requires arguments, and arguments are separated by commas. So this is argument 1, and this is just saying where on the screen do I want to draw coordinate x, and where do I want to draw coordinate y, and what is the length and what is the height. Here's another function where we draw the eclipse, and this is the 4 arguments for that. Did I say eclipse? Ellipse. There's several functions that we use that require arguments. Right line, it always requires an argument. It requires something like a string literal, or it requires something that goes out and returns something like clock.date. All of these things that we code where we go out to this block, it does return something, and arguments are separated by commas. So that is an example of how random works. If we do one of these later on, and we might, because random is used in a lot of methods in coding. Like if you want to generate a random password, you would use a random function that already exists. Right? Kind of makes sense, like generate random values. So it's used quite a bit in mathematics and coding. Okay. All right. We're moving along past random onto the next section, which is writing your own functions. And this is on page 236. Let me pause for a second so my internet can speed up to where I am. Okay, so page 236 is this portion where it's writing your own functions. And this is one of the things that we can't do in Small Basic, where we can't return functions. We can only use library functions. But it's important to read through this section, especially as you're taking the quiz. So when you write your own function, there's different parts of it. There's the data type, the function data type, and that matches the value that you're returning. So if you're returning an integer, your function data type would be integer. You give it a function name, such as input data or print data, or whatever the name is, and the rules follow the same as your subroutines. So no spaces, no special characters. And then you have a parameter list. And anything that you want inside of your function, you tab over, and then you write your statements. Return is the keyword that you use to pass a value out of the function. So here on 237 is an example of a function that somebody wrote in pseudocode. So you want to, the function name is sum, and you're passing in two arguments into the parameter list, number 1 and number 2. You're calculating the result, and then you're returning the result back to where it was called. And that call would have came out of the main module. So program 6.6 gives you the whole setup of how that works. So read through that section on flowcharting, the pseudocode, how to pass arguments out of functions. What else in this chapter? This is going to be a short lecture, how to use functions. Now we'll show you, I'll go over back and show you that program on how to use functions in Small Basic. IPO charts for functions, that's the input, the processing, and the output. So you could do an IPO for a function that says what are you processing, and then the output is what you would be sending out of the function. So get regular price, it asks the user to enter in price, and it returns the price as a real. Real, remember, is a decimal data type. So you could do IPOs if that helps you with planning your program. And we're getting to the end of the chapter. I think there's one more section that's just a sample code. Commission rate. These are good to go through so you can see different ways that code could be structured. And the other thing to remember as I'm flipping through this chapter is functions, modules, methods. These are all normal ways to code in programming. So if you're doing Small Basic or Java or whatever language you're learning, you're always coding in methods and modules. Or functions where you're returning values. Returning strings are done a little different, or not done differently, but if you're returning a string, here's an example where my data type of my module is string instead of int or real because I'm returning a string. One important thing is that you can always only return, if it's a function, you can only return one value from a function. So you can't return multiple values from a function, and that's one of those questions that will show up on a quiz. So since I'm stuck on this page, look at this pseudocode. What is the name of the function? It's called do something. What data type does the function return? Integer, because that's the data type of the function. And given the function call or the definition, what would be displayed to the screen? So if we did display do something and we pass it 10, what would be returned? We pass it 10 into here, we return 10 times 2, so we return 20, and 20 would be displayed to the screen. Library functions. So in every language there's a set of library functions. This section just goes through some of the most common ones, like square root. There's several in Small Basic we can look at. Power is another one. Random is kind of out of that math function. Absolute value, cosine, round. I don't think there's a way, several of you have asked me in Small Basic how to round a number. You can Google it, and I can't find a way to round a number in Small Basic because it's so simple. But in every language aside of Small Basic, which isn't a real programming language, it's a learning language, you can always use a round function. So here's a list of the common math functions that you might encounter. Okay, so that's the chapter. I think that's everything in there that we want to point out. Formatting. Oh, there's a set of formatting functions in certain languages where you can like format numbers or format text as all caps or something like that. Length functions with passwords. These are very good examples on how to do common things like create passwords and such. So look through those. Go through some of these, and that's the chapter. Okay, let's show you some. I pulled up the PowerPoint, but I'm not going to go through that. There's only 13 slides in here, but these will help you go through them, and it'll help you with the quiz when you're taking the quiz. In the PDF, the Introducing Small Basic that you have, there is a Chapter 9 that talks about subroutines. These, we've been doing subroutines, so we use the sub and the end sub keyword, but this is a good chapter to go through because it has some additional things like the print time function, or subroutine that they call it, where you can go out to the system and print the time. Well, no, this was a function that somebody coded, it looks like. Oh yeah, it uses clock.time. So you're going down here, printing the time, and going back. Or you could just do clock.time. Where am I? Text window dot writeline clock dot time. Okay, we've already shown you the date. But go through this. This gives you some help on subroutines and how to kind of call, introduces some new subroutines that we haven't looked at. Like, here's another one, find max. This is a subroutine that somebody wrote. So you go down here, you'll find the max number that, which number is higher when they enter in two numbers. So this section really doesn't show you too much new. But this one here, this is using math.sign, pass it an argument, and then multiply it by 100 and then add 200. Anyway, but here's an example where this is a math function that's built into Small Basic. And you could use sine or cosine. So there's another one. That just draws that. Calling subroutines inside loops you can do. Math.remainder. Now, there must be a series of math functions that we can use in Small Basic. So here they are. Math.what? Ceiling. That would return an integer. I wonder if there is a round thing. A round function, it would be in here. Oh, right there. Given a number to the nearest integer, it would be rounded, well, it would be rounded to 33. This doesn't do exactly what we wanted if it was a decimal, but that rounds a number up. But there's a whole series of math functions that you can use inside of Small Basic. So when we do our assignment for this section, which will be a combination of 7 and 8, maybe we'll use, chapter 6 and 7, we'll use some of these. But some of the more common ones, like the square root or power. Now this would probably take 2 arguments. Yep, the base number, so 10 raised to the power of 2. That would, we could say answer equals, because this function returns an answer. Text window dot writeline, and then let's display answer, and let's do a system, whoops, let's do a pause there. So here is something from the math one. So let's run that. Okay, there's my date, there's my time, and here is 10 raised to the power 2. So you can see, I close that, how I used, if I can type, used a built-in function, math.power, and then how I displayed that answer. You could even say, if I can type, the answer is plus answer. And then I paused it. Okay, this program is kind of cool. Well, let me finish this first. So go through this chapter 9 because there's some cool functions that are built into the math subroutine that you might want to use. So chapter 9 out of that PDF. I think we're done with all of that. Okay. Let me just walk you through this program. Download it and run it. Save it to your sample files because we'll do something similar to this with our Chapter 6-7 assignment or our one assignment for this unit. But I have a loop that runs my program again. I've already told you what those things do. And then I have an option that says, do you want to draw a rectangle or do you want to draw an ellipse? And again, this one draws the rectangle with 4 arguments and this one draws the ellipse with 4 arguments. And then I read it to run again. So this uses graphics window instead of text window. It's kind of fun. We're getting into a little bit more types of code. But there's the first part, and then enter 1 to draw a triangle. And what that part, when I hit that, it goes out to that draw rectangle method or function, and it takes these arguments to make a black screen, and in light blue, draw all of these rectangles where it starts at 100 and then steps by 5. That's where it's going, out 5, out 5, out 5, out 5. So if you didn't step by 5, it would just draw a solid box, right? So we have a line that's being drawn around. So I have a loop. Do you want to quit? If we move this over here, do you want to run again? Yes. Let's do our ellipse. And 2. And then it draws a circle or an ellipse. But it did it over that rectangle because I didn't create a new box or clear out that box. So if I run it again, end the program and run again and start with 2, you can see it'll draw that. Ooh, that makes me dizzy. Anyway, this is a cool program because it just shows you how to use these built-in functions. So we have a couple functions that are built in that we've used that are new. So that's it for Chapter 6. It's important, it's an important chapter even though we're not going to do a program or write our own functions, but we are going to use our built-in library functions. So enjoy it, read it, take the quiz, and listen to Chapter 7 before you do the assignment in this unit. So I'm going to do that lecture video now. Thank you. Have a great day.